Hello and welcome to Auto Shenanigans. How the devil are you? Have you had a good week? My name is John. Thank you very much for joining me for another exciting episode of Secrets of the Motorway. Today we'll be tackling the longest motorway that you'll find in Scotland, the M8. It's been around since 1965, with construction occurring at various points over the years, right the way up until 2017. Like the M90 that we saw last week, this motorway has been 50 years in the making. And what an absolute treat it is. It runs for about 61 miles, starting on the west side of Edinburgh, then slicing its way through Glasgow before coming to an end at a place called Langbank on the River Clyde. It's got 38 junctions in total, so we best get crack-a-lacking. It's well known that Glasgow has the M8 running right through the middle, creating an absolutely beautiful inner-city motorway. But did you also know there were once similar plans to ruin Edinburgh? Back in the good old days, they wanted the M8 motorway to connect to an inner-city ring road, meaning Junction 1 wouldn't have been Junction 1 at all, and we'd have found the M8 extending further to the west, right into the middle of Edinburgh. Whilst the plans for this was drawn up in the 1960s, they were still talking about it in the 1970s, but because the opposition to all of these plans was so strong, they decided not to bother. As a result of not bothering, the M8 didn't exist between Junctions 1 and 2 until the mid-1990s. Before then, the motorway terminated at the New Bridge roundabout, which today is actually part of the M9. We looked at this in a bit more detail in the M9 video, so feel free to check that out. At Junction 3, we find the 10-metre high Norgate, which is a stone structure or art piece created by artist David Wilson. Whilst the M8 here opened in 1969, the art piece was installed in 1995 and is one of several pieces to be found around Livingston. The reason that this and the others were built was to waste money. No, really, Livingston District Council were awarded a vast sum of cash from the government to invest in infrastructure and construction projects, for example, the Almondvale Stadium. The thing is, even after the council had done everything they wanted to do, they had a load of cash left over. Unheard of these days, but of course it wasn't as if they were going to hand that money back. Instead, they used the remaining funds to commission several art installations around the town. One such piece is Norgate, found at Junction 3. Another art piece can be found at Junction 3A, known as the Sawtooth Ramps. It's a collection of human-made pyramids that runs for 300 metres alongside the M8, and like Norgate, it was installed in the mid-90s, but for very different reasons. In short, a group of people got together with the intention of creating an art corridor along the entire length of the M8 using various sculptures and structures. Their reason being, it was a boring and dull motorway, and by creating all of these wonderful structures and art installations, the M8 would surely become a talking point around the world. So they built just one structure on the M8, with a bit of help from Motorola and artist Patricia Layton, the 11-metre high Sawtooth Ramps. It wasn't quite the vision that they had in mind, but it was something, and years later I'm stood here talking about it, so I suppose it worked. Junction 4A is also known as the Heartlands Interchange. It sits between Junctions 4 and 5, which was the first section of the M8 to open in 1965. However, Junction 4A wouldn't open until 2013. Along with the new junction, a new link road was constructed down to the B7066, upon which we find a service station. It's not an official motorway service station, but surprisingly it offers a lot more than the M8's one official service station, which is just up the road. This is Heart of Scotland Services, sometimes referred to as Harthill Services, but that name was officially dropped in 2006. It's pretty crap as motorway services go, but it's the only official service station on the entire length of the M8. There is one feature worth mentioning though, the Helical Truss footbridge. It replaced an ageing footbridge that had been in place since 1971, and whilst it might seem a little bit excessive and over the top in the context of this small services, the site's also used as a park and ride with the expectation that many pedestrians would need to access both sides. Using Junction 5, we can head up to the Forestburn Reservoir, where we find the Forestburn Hill Climb Circuit. It opened in the mid-1990s and is said to be the first purpose-built hill climb circuit in the entirety of the UK since Brooklands installed theirs in the 1930s. It looks like a lovely day out, and indeed it is, but what's interesting is that this hill climb circuit was only a small piece of a much larger plan. Scotland's nearly had its own international racing circuit to rival circuits like Spa and Silverstone. Plans were put forward, in fact a lot of plans were put forward, to build an amazing motorsport venue and facility around the Forestburn Reservoir. Given the scenery, it would have made for a spectacular race and circuit, but it never happened, and I don't know why. Planning permission was granted, but the only bit they built was the comparatively small hill climb section. Junction 6 is where until 2017 the M8 came to an end. Well, sort of. Originally, the M8 would terminate here and that was it. Later, in 1980, a section of the M8 would open to the west, but there was still a missing link between the two sections, which wouldn't come until 2017. Until this point, to continue your journey at Junction 6, you'd have made use of the A8, but following the M8's construction, the A8 was rerouted and realigned, oddly with a carriageway sitting on either side of the motorway. Junction 7A is a bit of an oddity. This is perhaps because over the years, the junction and surrounding roads have been added to, making it a bit worse each time. It all started started as a simple crossroad between the A8 and the A725. The A8 was later upgraded to a dual carriageway and a proper junction was constructed. The problem was that this new dual carriageway junction fed traffic into Bells Hill via a road that really wasn't designed to handle it. The solution was to build the Bells Hill bypass, which they did, and in doing so modified the junction and added a set of free-flowing slip roads. All of that, and the M8 hasn't even made an appearance yet. The junction, by all accounts, was shite. The design layout was poor and in some cases unsafe. When the M8 was built, it was of course the perfect opportunity to correct some of those issues, which they did, but it still leaves us with a bit of a cluttered junction. Junction 8 is where we find the Baillieston interchange. I already covered that in the A8M and the M73 video, so if you don't mind, we're going to skip right on over that and take a look at Junction 9. The section of M8 between junctions 9 and 12 was built on the old Monkland Canal, and some refer to this section of motorway as the Monkland Motorway. The canal had been abandoned by 1950 and was full of so much crap it was deemed a health and safety hazard. Therefore, it made a lot more sense to build a motorway over the top of it rather than demolish people's houses. It took a little while, but the motorway here opened in 1980. The motorway starts to get a little bit more interesting from here on out as we go from a rural setting to a much more built-up urban area. Junctions 10, 11 and 12 are wonderful examples of how not to construct a motorway junction in 2023. Junction 12 is particularly interesting, with possibly one of the tightest slip roads I've ever seen. It gets worse later on, I can assure you, and a lot of the interesting motorway features found around Glasgow can be attributed to one single plan, the Great Glasgow Transportation Plan. Frankly, this was an insane idea that would have seen several more motorways built in and around Glasgow, with several existing motorways linked together. Like a lot of early road planning schemes, some of it was built and a lot of it wasn't. At Junction 13, or the Proven Interchange, there's a wider carriageway on the eastbound entry slip road, which hints towards that previous insane plan, or at least part of it. There were plans for another motorway to be built here running south, connecting up with yet another motorway that would have been built along the route of today's A74. Had it all been built to plan, I imagine we'd have found another lane or bit of carriageway on our slip road here at Junction 13. Interestingly, in 2016, the plan was somewhat regurgitated, although this time on a much smaller scale. The intention was to build a linking main road from the interchange down to the A728 along the path of a disused railway line. It was going to cost £60 million and be completed by 2021. For some reason, the plan seemed to have been forgotten about and the funding reallocated elsewhere. Junction 15 is a complete mess, made up of mostly a bodged-together set of temporary solutions. It was the first interchange in part of motorway to be constructed as part of Glasgow's inner city motorway. At the time, the plan was for other motorways or main roads to connect up with the interchange, so its layout was originally intended as a temporary one whilst they awaited the construction of these other linking roads. 3 temporary layouts later, and they still hadn't connected any of those new roads on the basis that they hadn't built them. Today's A803, which runs to the north, was built with the intention of being an expressway, effectively a cheaper motorway, but they only built about 40% of it before giving up. On the south side of the interchange, not a lot really happened. However, today there's an odd patch of gravel, which if you look at it from above, was clearly designed to accommodate an additional road or carriageway. And there we are then, guys. That's all we've got time for this week. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you liked the video. If you did, there is of course a button specifically for that. And if you haven't subscribed already, please consider doing so. That'd be wicked sweet awesome. Enjoy the rest of your week, whatever it is you get up to. My name's John. You've been watching Auto Shenanigans, and I'll see you next time for another exciting episode of Secrets of the Motorway. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.